everybody. This is Allison Pillow and Maya Gottlieb with the Integrate Yourself podcast.
Hi guys, how are
Hey.
you? It's always
So,
someone those hesitations of what are we going to
I know,
say and
right?
how
We're
we're
like,
going to say it,
what now? What next? Okay,
right?
so so today we talked. Maya and I talked about following up with some of the later or the earlier podcasts. One being number 7, which was about liver function. And we talked a lot about liver function in that one, but also we hit upon or touched upon a little bit the resistant starch thing. And we started talking about that actually, and discovered that that's a pretty big subject. So that's why we decided to make this show about that, and thought it was important enough to talk about. So I guess let's start off with the resistant starch thing. What's the deal with that? Why do people say it's so healthy, Maya?
I am so I've been researching to kind of get an understanding for myself, and what I've really noticed is that it kind of goes in along with the idea of fiber is good for you.
Yeah.
And so if we think about why resistant starches act like well, they actually are a soluble fiber. It's the constant knowing of whether or not the resistant starch is good for you has debates in it where if your gut's not working, say you have some gut issues, you actually are creating some more distress. So a lot of people talk about taking that resistant starch and then putting it in a, more cookable compound so that breaks it down so that you can eat it. So like if you do the legumes, you'll cook the legumes to open up the cellulose wall to make it available for digestion. And then you can do that with rice and potatoes. They say it's the same thing. Potatoes, I kind of think in a different way now, but we can get that later. But that's kind of what I think what we're talking about when we talk about resistant
So
starches.
basically, cooking it and then uh, ma- cooling it down and then reheating it again is what creates that resistant starch. And mainly potatoes is what I know, and then rice. But I didn't know beans. Does that do the same
Yeah.
thing? Okay.
So when I researched something, I found that there's four types of resistance. And their first type is grains, seeds, and legumes that have resisted digestion because of the bound of the fibrous cell walls. Type 2 is the starchy foods, including raw potatoes and green bananas. Then type 3
Oh
is
yeah.
the starchy foods, including the potatoes, rice, cooked and then cooled, the turning into a digestible starch, the one you're talking about, which they call a process called retrogradation.
Okay.
And type 4 is the man-made with forms of chemical process, which I'm a little not really sure
So
which one those are, but
okay.
maybe
Yeah.
maybe it has to do with corn or something where you kind of
Oh.
put it, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm
I'm
not
gonna
too
leave that
familiar
one
with that one.
away.
Yeah, let's don't really know much about that one either. I've not heard of that. I didn't know there
But
was a man-made resistant starch. That's interesting. But
yeah,
yeah, so I guess the bottom line is resistant starch is actually easier for your body to digest the food
after it's
as
cooked.
opposed, yeah, after it's cooked, as opposed to something like a bread or a pasta.
Well,
Yep.
actually, I think it's the reverse. It's how it's prepared makes it the resistant starch becomes better for you. So, like, if
Oh,
you
okay.
cook
I see.
if you cook a banana and allow it to break down, because like especially a banana that hasn't ripened, then you degrade the resistant starch and it turns it into a regular starch. So these are things
Oh,
that
right.
have a really hard digestibility. And what we're looking at is what does that mean in terms of why everyone goes to more of a complex carb,
All right.
why
Yeah.
rice and stuff. But the problem I'm having when I even look at this is it kind of brings up the issue about the bacteria in the gut. The what I read is that the bacteria in the gut, you would want these to help the bacteria in the gut, but the only problem is that if you have a low metabolism or you're having hyperthyroid symptoms, what you're creating is more issues for the gut to process.
So harder work, basically.
Right. So
Yeah.
that's why you really have to cook them down. You have to make sure that what you're doing is creating that digestibility, because you're already having so many problems already with the gut having overgrowth or having some issue with, serotonin buildup because of that overgrowth. The whole concept it looks like it flips on itself. Like
Yeah.
one aspect you see it saying, "Oh, it's great for you." The other aspect is, do you even know how your gut's working? Like,
Well,
you take your temp.
that's such a good point because that's pretty much where I start with all my clients is like how well are you digesting right now, and we base what where that person's going to go from there because if like you said if they're not digesting very well at all, or they have really low metabolism, it's going to be really hard for them to digest something like cellulose, like a lot of lettuce, a lot of like what's normally prescribed or told to people to eat that's healthy, like kale or a lot of the brown rice is one of those things too. So to me, it just makes it much harder on people's digestive system. A lot of the nuts and seeds too are recommended, and it's going to be creating a lot more inflammation, and I don't think people realize that. But that's we're going off track a little bit with that, but I think that getting back to the resistant starch, I think people are also in some ways afraid of starch because of the glycemic index. I don't know if we want to go into that right now because that's really a big one. I remember when we were talking about it, I was like, whoa, that's huge. So,
Well,
yeah.
just before we go into that, one of the things about this article I was reading was why people should eat resistant starch. And there's two things it brought up. It said it actually, helps the bacteria in your gut, but it also creates a short chain fatty acid. And the most important of the short chain fatty acids is butyrate, and
Okay.
it's actually like a preferred end quote, preferred fuel for the cell that lines the colon. Now, what I don't understand about that is what that fatty acid is doing. Like, from our knowledge of fatty acids, short chain fatty acids, they're maybe able to process, but when we have long chain fatty acids, then we're in a problem with the bloodstream of the liver and the rest of the body. So somewhere inside there's a benefit of this butyrate, which is basically, and I'm butchering the name, so I want to spell it. It's Butyrate.
Okay.
And it says it reduces the pH level, potentially reducing inflammation, and it should lower the risk of colon cancer. So these are all why they say it's great. Now,
Okay.
if
Yeah.
we take what we know about the glycemic index, if we want to switch over to now my kind of confusion of why we kind of need starches, but we don't know how to use them maybe in the right context, or maybe we're thinking, brown rice is better than white rice, or wheat bread is better than white bread, because the theory of the glycemic index was that if you had some fiber, then you would basically slow down that sugar spike because the insulin and all that.
Hmm.
Now, the problem with that idea is that as tests have come, and I'm going to promote this book right now. This book right here.
Here,
I am
move it to the
so in love
middle
with
a
this
little bit.
book.
Move it to the middle. There you go. Now we can see it and hold it real still because there you go.
So I'll put it in my face
Yeah, no,
because
that
it
is
is
a
a
good book. I can attest to that. I keep going back and forth to it to look for new information, but she does a really great job of kind of
absolutely.
describing what we're talking about for sure.
Yeah, and there's a part where she talks about the research studies of the Diabetic Society and how what they got into was knowing that, if we slow down the sugar spikes, then it's got to be a good food to eat. So that's where you get that range of glycemic index from 0 to 100, and pure glucose is 100, and then everything's rated from there. And when we then break down the sugars, we have to remember the different types of sugars, right? We got the
Hmm.
fructose, lactose, sucrose, glucose, right?
Right.
Well, if we look at the resistant starch, they were saying the fiber was going to slow down that glycemic index so that you could basically not spike your insulin. but the spike your blood sugar to cause the insulin. And what they found was actually, as we always have two sides of the story, that the fiber doesn't do is what we think it did. It basically goes the intestines and then does another bacteria thing. But what we don't recognize, I believe this is what we're kind of getting to, is the
Hmm.
fiber causes the endotoxin buildup.
So more bacteria that you don't really want, basically, it creates. Yeah.
Well, the resistant starch, I'm making sure I'm centered because last time I was off centered.
I
I'm
know,
all
right?
paranoid now, right?
No, yeah, you're
Um,
good.
so what I'm recognizing is what we're looking at is, okay, so say pure glucose is 100, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, sugar is like, in her book, she says is about 65. Then we have milk is about 35, and then orange juice about 52. But
Okay.
here's the kicker. Wheat bread is 72.
Wow. Yeah,
So
that's
we're going up higher on that index when we go into grains, certain things that kind of have the fiber that's supposed to help the body regulate.
right.
And so if we take the concept of what we've learned about how gut health can be an absolute stress kind of throw you over the board kind of thing where you can't digest food. You create more serotonin because the endotoxins build in your gut because of that. You can talk about leaky gut syndrome. You can talk about all the things where colitis, cancers, those things are starting to show more fluctuation with this like increase of our grain in our pyramid, right? Our
Right.
whole idea of like how many grains we should have in our diet right now. And so why this part of connection for me is making me kind of question this idea about resistant starches and what we're doing is to say, wait a minute, if I look at myself and my healing, am I going to eat that much grain that now? Because I might not be able to digest it. Now, it's not to say I won't have it because rice, which now I lean to eating more white rice because
Hmm.
I don't have to have all that fiber. And if I'm going to have some rice, it's going to be with a fat, it's going to be with a protein, and it's going to be balanced so that that doesn't spike me up and make me, have all that insulin.
Right. Because the idea, because basically rice and potatoes are straight glucose. That's the difference between those and fruit. But
Well, actually, protein actually has, I mean, potatoes have a high level of protein, and
protein
that's
too. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
so that was one of the things that I was talking to you about the fact that was how much protein is in a potato is like 33 grams. So
Wow. That's
if
incredible.
if you think about what happens when it's getting compared, and she has it in this book also, and there's someone else has written it about it, where you basically are looking at a dry product versus a wet product, and you have to do the math a little differently.
Hmm.
And when it comes out, the protein in the potato is so much more, um, uh,
Accessible.
decibel.
Yeah.
And
Right.
if you think about history and cultures that live off
Yeah. That's right.
potatoes,
Yeah. Yeah. That makes so much sense. Yeah.
so you're looking at a whole different type of starch there.
Right.
So we really kind of work on like, oh, wait, that kind of throws that whole thing into um, another category, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, not to mention it has other nutrients in it, vitamins and minerals that a lot of breads and pastas just don't have. They most of the time actually they have to fortify those products, so they're adding in extra iron even, which is not good. So
no. Because
yeah, it's,
here's the thing I found so fascinating. So if we think about like grains have high phosphorus versus calcium ratio,
hmm.
and what we're looking at is how to calcium and phosphorus, how the ratio actually needs to be more balanced because if you have more phosphorus and to the calcium, it actually will then create the increase of the parathyroid hormones, which causes calcium to be leached from your bones, not build them.
Which can cause
So
osteoporosis. Yep.
absolutely,
Yep.
you're on it. So,
Yep.
think about why we even talk about, and this is a side note, is why we don't promote a lot of protein as your main diet forming around yourself, because you are doing the same thing, right?
Right.
It's reducing the calcium intake in your body. And so what I kind of find is this is the same concept of short term versus long term, like what we're not seeing down the road when we start introducing these kind of concepts of why certain things aren't that great, like resistant starches. Here, let's look at this, right?
Right. Right. So that's incredible.
Yeah.
I just lost you. That's even more incredible. Okay, there you come. There you are again. Okay, so let's see. So going back to the glycemic index, because I do want to talk about. There's so many things that just popped up into my head that I want to point out with that. And when you say protein, first let's go to this one first. Actually, when you say protein, lower protein, what that means to me, because this is how I use it, is when someone's having a hard time digesting food, or if they've been a vegan for a long time and they want to start getting back onto other, maybe animal proteins. I usually would start that person slow instead of just giving them a whole bunch of meat to eat, because their digestive system just isn't going to be ready to handle something that heavy. So when we say protein, how I approach it are potatoes. I do if they can handle dairy, I do dairy products. We do bone broth, gelatin, and eggs. So those are good sources of protein in addition to meat. But if you don't do a lot of meat, or if you can't handle digesting a lot of meat, you can always go to those other protein sources, and those are easier for the body to handle until your digestion gets to a certain point where you're able to digest a little bit more. But it's like where are you starting? Like, nothing is permanent. So as you heal, you'll be able to take in more foods. But I just wanted to clarify that's kind of what I think you were saying too, but that's where I come from when I first meet someone. Is I always start them with, how well are you digesting your food? And then from there, I wanted to go kind of into like the glycemic index thing and differentiate the types of sugars, because I think so. From what we've talked about so far, it's sounding like carbohydrates, are not equal for sure. So there's certain types of carbohydrates that are more starchy that are going to have a different effect on you than like sucrose or fructose. And for some reason, people kind of lump they kind of make sugar worse than everything. So and that's kind of the trend I'm seeing. And sometimes people are even eating bread and then saying sugar's bad. So I don't think they're quite understanding what sugar is, possibly. But the other thing is, I want to clarify, like, glucose opposed to, and the response the body has to that, as opposed to fructose and sucrose.
Okay.
So maybe let's talk about that, actually, because I know,
So, like,
yeah.
okay, fructose, right?
Hmm.
Combination of two things, right? So what we're looking at is how that breaks down, and what we forget is that fructose takes a while to break down in the system. So that's why it slows down, and the glycemic index shows it not as high as like pure glucose. And so what we're looking at is why we kind of are maybe confused. The society has been taught that fruits are too, like a glass of orange juice, right? I said, was it 52, right? The
Right.
glycemic index.
Yeah.
But that's less than a piece of bread.
Way less. Yeah.
So what we're looking at is what we don't understand about how it's being processed and absorption into the body. And if you do drink, tons of it, and you can overexceed in every amount of anything.
Hmm.
But if you look at how it doesn't spike everything as much, you're kind of got to look at why would you say like a grain would be better than a fruit,
Right.
especially a tropical fruit, right? Like one of the things I meant to mention was like bananas, like that they were talking about resistant bananas, or you could cook them and they'd be broken down.
Also
But
plantains, right? Plantains would
right,
be under that. Yeah.
but the other part of that is it creates also the serotonin increase. So if you eat a banana, that's
Okay.
not even, I kind of have to pay attention to this because I started to eat really ripe bananas thinking they were
Hmm.
still okay, but
Because
there's
I heard
still.
that there's more sucrose in riper bananas too. Is that correct or no?
Now, I don't know about that. I
Okay.
do only know that it increases the serotonin in the gut. So if I'm
Okay.
having a very stressful day, sure enough, that's not on my first thing to eat kind of thing. Now, if it's the only thing I've got, yes, I'm going to eat that, but I'm
Right.
going to make sure it's really ripe. So like plantains, green bananas, and if you look at cultures that really cook them in like lard and stuff like that, it's to help them break down better in your system.
That makes sense.
So these are all, clues in why certain foods were cooked in a certain way in cultures. And when we go back to what you were talking about, the glucose, like, I think what got caught up, and I kind of had to rethink this too, was people think if you have sugar, you're going to gain weight. That's kind of the
That is the
concept.
belief. Yeah.
Right? It's not, oh, if I have the cake with the starch, with the sugar, with the fat, then I kind of forget how that storage goes into the play. So,
Right.
like,
Well, not to
we talk,
mention all the guilt and shame that goes with eating sugar,
yeah.
right? That could be a whole nother topic.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You think about how we all sit after dinner and say, so should I eat another piece
Well, like
of,
dessert is like
dessert,
really, it's bad or whatever, like I'm being
Yeah, we're
bad
all
if I
like,
eat
a little
dessert.
contorted, like,
Yeah.
should I, shouldn't I,
Yeah.
and
But
these
if
are
you
all
go to
like.
another country, it's not like that at all, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Like France,
Yeah.
always we can go back to France and the heavy
Of
creams
course.
and the sugar,
Spain.
and
Yeah.
Spain, all these,
All the romantic places.
the people who know,
Yes.
like, why this is
They have
important, right?
sweetness in their life. There's like, yeah, so
So like one of the things that I kind of remember now is like glucogenesis. Like
hmm.
what we understand about that is very limited. Like most people don't understand that's the glycogen in your liver that needs to be broken down if you eat paleo diet. That'll be my little end point here,
Yeah.
is that if you eat a lot of meat and without sugar or carbs, don't get caught up in the sugar world,
Right.
Nate. If you don't balance your meal out and you have a lot of protein at one time, that glucogenesis means that it has to go to the liver and pull out the glucose. If you don't have enough, then it's going to break down the muscle. It's going to break down the tissues and to get what it needs from the body. And that is where we go into this whole concept of, well, that's a good thing, right? We're utilizing the body's fat to
But it's
break
not
down.
taking but it's actually taking the muscle though. It's not taking the fat, correct?
Right,
Yeah.
because it has to get the amino acids and it
Yeah.
also has to use the fat.
Right.
So you're doing kind of this uh, ideal diet for now, is
Hmm.
what I like to kind of maybe say, is like what we're doing now will work. You will get
You'll
trim.
lose
You
weight.
will lose weight because you're eating yourself,
But you'll
basically.
lose muscle, which is weight. So
So then you increase your protein take,
and then
right?
what I've learned is what happens is if you lose muscle, then your metabolism slows down because it doesn't have the muscle to keep regenerating the metabolism, right?
So then you
In a
get.
very simplified, that's a very simplified explanation, but that's how women tend to get more estrogen dominant as well because they lose the muscle and then, the cells tend to hold water. So, but yeah, that's what that reminds me of. But it's a more catabolic effect, and I only say that because I've been there. I remember being really way too thin, and I lost a lot of muscle. But gaining my muscle back actually makes me feel strong, and I feel just like I have so much more power and energy now. Even though my clothes are a little tighter, I'm okay with that. It's okay. I'm not afraid of it. So I think kind of like going into like women being more comfortable with having some muscle and feeling strong is not a bad idea for those who are comfortable with it.
Yeah, and I kind of find that one of the things about, what we're talking about is, if you eat a lot of protein, you can do the same thing as a vegetarian can do. You can actually cause the body to
Yeah,
have to work really hard. And then you go into the real issues of what happens to ammonia buildup, right? We go into that can be another topic, but like
right.
why people start to smell a little bit of like ammonia in
Yeah,
their body
which is
because
toxic, right? That's
the
toxins kind of coming off.
ketones, the
Yeah,
whole aspect of what's happening is creating some kind of breakdown. And then
right,
it's breaking that need for the ammonia to kind of come through the urine. And so this is concepts of how much stress is happening in the body versus how much you really want to be having in the body. Like, are you accelerating the catabolic parts of you internally that are
right.
keeping you you know, trim, but in self-defense, you're basically having to say, um, okay, I'm doing this to have more of a fit body, or I'm doing this to have, fit in my jeans,
Well,
whatever,
I mean,
you know.
our definition of fit, what is that? You know what I'm saying? Because, like, to me, that's not fit. Like, I kind of feel like you're really putting your liver through a lot of stress. So you're kind of like you're sacrificing your liver if you're doing that. So you're creating that stress response constantly. The liver doesn't have any sugar or glucose to work with. It's got to convert the protein and the fat into sugars, which is a lot, it takes a lot more energy. You can certainly do it in times of high stress, but it's actually not something you want to depend on for the rest of your life. So, um, it's just a mechanism that we use for survival, and so what you're going to do is your body's going to eventually just slow down. It's going to shut down, and it's going to start eating itself, which sounds really gross, but that's basically what happens.
Oh well.
So, yeah, I know. And so that's what got me actually on this because learning also that fructose and sucrose don't actually need insulin to metabolize. So I was like, wow, that okay. So then though, if you eat glucose from good sources like potatoes or rice, or I mean, I'm sure there's other things that are straight glucose, but that's all I can think of at the moment. Um, then you can just add fat or and even like a fruit with it, and that can actually offset the insulin response. So there's like you got to just know kind of what to put together, and also like you said, like a lot of the foods that are very traditional, like the ways people traditionally have cooked in many cultures, actually it's really fascinating because they're in line with everything that we're talking about. They combine the foods in such a way that it helps the body metabolize it better. And that's why those ways of traditional cooking are really so important for people to pass down because it's so smart, because they know what they're
Yeah.
doing. I mean, they've been passed down from generation to generation, and we're just kind of throwing it all away in this for the sake of being able to fit into some jeans. So,
Right, like we talked about cornmeal and how like the process that you get with the three sisters, right? They do the
yeah,
lime and the lard together and it breaks down the corn so it's a better type of corn for your digestion, right? These are all
right.
things that don't get done anymore. So no wonder people have issues with corn, where they get histamine reactions, some people have rashes or have certain flare-ups when they have a lot of these. Maybe I could say this wouldn't be correct is resistant starches because their gut's still not able to handle the way that it's being processed because it's not the traditional way that it could have been,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
um, you know, one of the issues that we kind of have to think about is how to heal the gut. And so healing the gut, with like eating bamboo shoots or white button mushrooms, cooking those down,
right, yeah.
eating a raw carrot. The bamboo shoots are an interesting way of doing it, but you can get canned ones versus, the real. I've done the cooking of the real bamboo. We foraged our own,
Oh, wow.
and
That's
that
amazing.
kind of was an interesting looking.
Was it a big
When you
process to do that or
well, you learn to only pick the baby ones because they're not as starchy. Like literally, it's like a
Oh,
ladder inside, so it
interesting.
looks like these capsules of pockets, like you look into the interior.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get the small baby ones, and then pull off the outsides, and then you cook those down to make it really kind of easy. But they're very sweet and they're very good when you've got them, cooked down.
That's
But
cool. Yeah.
yeah, so if you think about the Japanese, they eat a lot of bamboo shoots.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure they reheat the rice. I think they go through a process of the sticky rice, making it sticky, but I think it is because they recook it a bunch of times, or they go through that process of it. And what I've understood about it is that it actually it creates probiotics, some kind of a probiotic on the rice, but also easier. I guess that creates it. It's a way to easier to digest it. Making it a resistant starch, I'm not really sure, but I think that's why you want to make the rice, cool it down, and then reheat it because it does has, I guess, those probiotic qualities. I don't know if that's true or not. Do you know that? That's what I've read and heard, but yeah.
I agree that I don't know much about it. I know that if I looked at what they said about the resistant starches supposedly helping the gut,
Hmm.
I would say that what you're saying is pretty accurate. The process of also, like, I think it's this type of rice they use, and then like if compared to like sushi rice and their right the rice that you get in your bowl, that one has vinegar and
Hold
there's a
on a
whole.
second. Keep talking. I'll be right back.
We'll just be right back.
Okay, sorry about that.
I just stopped talking. You
Oh,
can
you
just cut
did.
us out.
Okay, darn it.
I'm not, I
Okay.
don't know. It just felt like it's going to be hard to have a split screen where you're going to be like
Huh.
gone. And
Right,
I'm just
right.
talking to myself going, hi, everyone.
Yeah, I understand. Um, okay, so yeah, so the rice thing, I kind of feel like we covered a lot right there. Is there anything else you wanted to add to it as far as like any other avenues you want to go down?
Um, I think we got more about what the gut health would be to look at the gelatin to help
Oh,
bone
right.
broth.
Yes.
Those things would be vital, I think, for helping the gut heal. Especially because if you do need protein, you do need it in different ways besides muscle meat. That would mean you'd have to get, the glycine and the other essential amino acids through your food. And when you do that, you would need the gelatin to kind of bring that to
So gelatin's a
your.
source of protein, just so everybody knows, and it's a source of protein that actually is non-inflammatory. So I always recommend people use gelatin, a healthy source of gelatin. Probably if you're using the Great Lakes, it's the one in the green container, the hydrolyzed one. But you want to use that instead of like those protein powders made from whey. Those first of all have a lot of crap in them, and now they have pea protein and stuff like that, and that actually isn't, to me, is kind of a waste because it's really, it doesn't seem to have anything that good or nutritionally dense to it. So I always recommend the gelatin. But let's see, yeah, and so of course carrots for digestive aids. But we can get into that like on another a podcast and just focus on the digestive aids. I think that would be good, or we could do a mini like talk about it. But I was going to bring up one more thing about the resistant starch. So, did we decide that resistant starch was a good thing for someone who is going through a healing process?
I think if you're looking at how you cook it, it is.
Okay,
If you don't cook it to the way you can digest it, so rice being cooked with a fat or potato good with a
like
fat,
butter. Yeah.
butter, and what you're looking at is how that is going through your system. And so ease of digestion is probably the most important thing you'd want is how easily can this food be assimilated into your body. So that's why sugar is something we give to people who are especially limited in digestion, and they also have symptoms of anxiety, or they have some issues about some, not enough fueling, to get enough
Right.
fuel.
Because it's a quick
So,
source of energy, basically, is what you're saying, right?
right. And so
Yeah.
we want to keep people balanced, and and that means when we talk about food frequency, we said you increment it differently, and, balancing it with like some way of saying, okay, a smaller meal of this and together will be better for you than to sit there and not eat anything for another couple of hours, because
Okay.
that just puts you into another insulin issue, because the lower your blood sugar drops.
Right. And if you do that too much, it just starts, your body starts slowing down. And that
Yeah.
can create, I kind of feel like that creates all those other issues with inflammation, but we could, that could be a whole nother thing too. But
Yeah, and
yeah, I
I'll
just think the
add it.
key is blood sugar, totally keeping that pretty frequent and solid.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating when I found out that glucose is the real provider for your red blood cells and your brain. Like,
Yeah,
you can utilize some fats for your brain, but the real component that's really great for your cognitive understanding and how your blood cells are going to be able to work is glucose.
I
Like,
agree. Yeah, that's what I found out too. It's incredible.
right.
Yeah.
And if
You talk
if
about we have all these supplements and products for brain function, but if you just eat some sugar, actually you don't have to spend all that money, right? I know that sounds
yeah,
really funny,
right?
but anyway, carbohydrates, good carbohydrates. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not to say they're not. I wouldn't say they're not bad, but they're um, contradictory in their statement of why you eat them. Like, if we're looking at what we're talking about, you have to kind of think, wait, that kind of makes this a little bit harder to understand. So, resistant starches, yes or no? How you cook them,
Right.
that's how I would
What the
say.
context is of it, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's awesome. Thank you, Maya. That was a great talk. I really enjoyed that, and I hopefully, we helped everybody get clear on that. That's the
Yeah, I
intention,
know
right?
I'm a little clearer, but I can always
It
do
can get
more
pretty
refining, right?
complicating. Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
so what we'll do on our next show, we're gonna start doing these little about for 15-minute segments of quick tips. So we're probably gonna talk a little bit about more about on those quick tips about how to specifically cook certain things. So, stay tuned for that. We'll probably have a follow-up show from this one with some of the quick tips and on the digestive age show too. So, yeah. Well, thanks everybody for watching.
Thanks,
And
guys.
yeah, we'll
Good
we'll
to
talk to you guys next time. Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
bye.
Bye bye.